Sakaguchi's dream lives on in Square Enix like a vengeful ghost. Recently, live-action adaptations of video games seems like the hot thing. We had Detective Pikachu recently, we've got The Witcher coming up, Sonic coming up, and just announced is a live-action TV series, Final Fantasy XIV. So let's take a look at Final Fantasy XIV and the live-action adaptation it's getting, and let's also take a look at what Japanese fans are saying about it. Do fans think it'll be good? Do fans think it'll stink? Let's jump right in. First off, the story of Final Fantasy XIV as a game in itself is quite interesting and almost heroic. The game has come a really long way in the past decade. I remember sitting in the Sony press conference back at E3 2009, and they put out the announcement trailer for the game, and people are just like, what? At that time, Final Fantasy XIII hadn't even come out yet, so there was this weird mix of confusion and mild excitement, and I really wasn't sure what to think except, hey, a new Final Fantasy game. That's cool. And after what can only be described as a colossal failure when the game launched back in 2010, Square Enix kind of tried to fix the game but deemed it to be unsavable, and so they apologized to fans and they started working on this kind of Final Fantasy XIV version 2.0. They then shut down the servers for the original Final Fantasy XIV in 2012, and in 2013 they launched Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, which basically came and redeemed Square Enix for the travesty that was the original Final Fantasy XIV. And over the years since A Realm Reborn launched in 2013, it has become one of the most beloved MMOs that are available on the market. It's maintained a pretty active player base, and it's got a couple expansions over the years, Heavensward and Stormblood, and another one, Shadowbringers, which comes out officially in a few days on July 2nd, I think, but actually is available now when I'm making this video on June 28th for people who pre-ordered the game, which is pretty cool. During the time that FF14 has been running, a lot of other MMOs have shifted to a free-to-play model, but FF14 2.0 has been able to keep the paywall up and work with the monthly subscription model because it's a really awesome game. Players love the story, the game is praised for its good world building, people love the class system. It's just quality stuff all around. But even so, this begs the question, can it actually be good as a live-action TV series? To be clear, this actually isn't the first time that Final Fantasy XIV has had a live-action adaptation. Back in 2017, there was a series that launched called Final Fantasy XIV: Dad of Light, which basically explored the relationship of a son and a father as they played FF14 together, with the interesting twist of the dad not knowing that he was actually playing with his son because his son was using a female character to befriend his dad in the game in order to learn a little bit more about his father and why his father had recently quit his job. Anyways, it's a pretty charming story and you can check it out on Netflix if you're interested. This time, however, we have a full-blown adventure set within the world of Final Fantasy XIV, Eorzea, and it's coming from Square Enix, Sony Pictures Television, and Hivemind. And this adaptation will, in the words of a Hivemind press release, embrace the bold and genre-bending sensibilities of the revered and long-running Final Fantasy series, as it explores the struggle between magic and technology in a quest to bring peace to a land in conflict. Filled with iconic landmarks of the title's revered mythology, Magitech and Beastmen, airships, and chocobos, the forthcoming series will feature a mixture of new and familiar faces. Those will, notably, include the live-action debut of Cid, one of the game's central and most beloved characters who has appeared in almost every installment of the franchise to date. Sounds very FF-ish. If you have no idea who Hivemind is, they're the ladies and gentlemen who produced The Expanse for Amazon. Right now they are working on a feature film with, I'm sorry I probably can't pronounce his name right, but Guillermo del Toro. And they are also doing the live adaptation of The Witcher featuring Henry Cavill, which seems like it has potential, so yeah. Not the worst people to have behind the project. And I've never seen The Expanse, but I heard it's pretty good, so maybe this bodes well for Final Fantasy XIV as well. Personally, I think it'll be interesting to see how this works out. Live-action video game adaptations have had a pretty spotty record, but there have also been a few that have been decent. We've had Prince of Persia, Silent Hill, the Resident Evil movies, Detective Pikachu, Mortal Kombat. Most of these haven't exactly been riveting, but they haven't necessarily been bad either. I guess my biggest concern is that this is Final Fantasy XIV. It's a super expansive MMO world, and with a story that's been running for years and years. So whether or not they can do something of this scale justice remains to be seen, because we had an attempt with World of Warcraft a little while ago, and that didn't really turn out so well. So I don't know if that puts a damper on things, but you know, I'm being optimistic. Final Fantasy XIV represents a story and consistent world that have been ongoing for the better part of a decade. So when you have hundreds of thousands of players and such a rich world to work with, capturing the essence of that is no easy task, but I think that they could tell a compelling story here if they just focused in on someone's tale within the world on a smaller scale and took advantage of all the material around that, instead of falling into the trap of blasting viewers with endless battle scenes and leaning on the source material without really exploring it in a way that's meaningful to fans. Because that represents a lot of what gaming fans have had to put up with these live action adaptations, so I certainly hope that is not the case yet again. Well, anyways, let's take a look at what Japanese fans are saying about this. And to be honest, I was looking through Japanese Twitter, but everything Final Fantasy XIV related is just buried in stuff about the new expansion Shadowbringers, because a whole bunch of people got early access to that today, so the world is abuzz about that. So instead we'll be looking at some comments from basically a Japanese blog that covers entertainment, anime, and games, and it's really popular in Japan, so it's always interesting to see what the fans over there are saying. Alright, here we go. More than this, let's get to making FF11 into an anime. I get the impression that people really love FF11. I was even doing a little research on some English forums today, and one gentleman likened his FF11 experience to a quasi-religious experience, saying that it was just life-changing. And I do have one friend who skipped university for a couple of years to play FF11, so I guess it must be a really awesome game. Never played it myself, but how about you? If you've played it, what's it all about? Sony Pictures is producing and Hivemind is making it. They're wrapped up in turning The Witcher into a drama right now. I guess it feels like they can do it when it comes to fantasy. Stop. Square Enix HQ. Well, recently it seems like Final Fantasy XIV is in a good state. Let's make a live-action version of it. History repeats itself. They have a history of putting out a movie that fails and does serious damage to the company. Without learning from their mistakes, they're gonna go at this again? Wouldn't a full CG version be better? Sakaguchi's dream lives on in Square Enix like a vengeful ghost. He's referencing Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi's sort of obsession with becoming a film director, which led to the Final Fantasy The Spirits Within movie, which came out years and years ago, which actually was relatively well received by critics, but ended up bombing and causing Square Enix to lose something like $94 million, which is a pretty tough pill to swallow. If this is made at the level of Game of Thrones, I could look forward to it. But if it's put together like an indie B movie, I don't want to see it. If it's like Game of Thrones, then I want to watch it. Does this have expressive power like Game of Thrones? The scenes of dragons destroying towns were so impactful. Well, what about this one? These are just a few comments, but I noticed that a lot of fans are drawing parallels to Game of Thrones, and I think that the Game of Thrones comparison is a kind of nice one, in that if Hivemind focuses on what really made Game of Thrones good, which was the wonderful overarching story, the relationships between the characters, the monologues, the way it built out and closed different plot lines, I think if they focus on that, it could be really great. So make it happen. I just honestly hope they don't take the route of so many others and give us this 10-episode walk through a bunch of Final Fantasy tropes with fancy CG and nothing going on under the hood, because that would be a real shame when they have all this really nice material to work with. Well, a lot of fans in Japan, and myself included, have reservations about the potential of this live-action series, but there's also a lot of room for optimism, because they could finally give us something worth talking about if they just go about it the right way. Final Fantasy XIV is a very popular game, and it is a very cool game filled with awesome backstory, characters. There are just so many places they could go with this. Let's just hope they don't go to the stinky places. But what do you think? What would it take for Final Fantasy XIV, the live action series, to really shine? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to check out Japanese fans' awesome video reactions to the Dragon Quest hero announcement in Super Smash Bros. You can check that out right here, as well as some other cool videos on my channel, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you in the comments. And now, I'm going to escape because ants are biting me.